A healthy skepticism is a fundamental part of any audit. We need to see more of it, and many of the AIU's findings suggest that there is sometimes a lack of skepticism. This is not just a problem in the UK. Other audit regulators have noted it also and see the need for improvement. It is not a total distrust of everything you see and hear on an audit, but it requires an inquiring mind that is open to the possibility that something may be wrong or not as it seems. Is what you see and hear reasonable or appropriate? And is it supported by evidence, the surrounding facts and circumstances, or consistent with what is known from elsewhere? You would expect in the current climate that the AIU has been looking at how auditors are testing asset impairments and the going concern assumption. These are areas where the client's assumptions about the future will be very important. The auditor needs to know what the key assumptions are, but finding out what the client has done is not the same as auditing it. The auditor also needs to consider whether they are reasonable in the circumstances. So the AIU expects to see not only a record of what the assumptions are, but also some indication that the auditor has challenged them and understood how they affect the conclusions the client has come to. Too often, it seems that the auditor is looking for reasons why assumptions can be supported, without also considering facts that might suggest they are not appropriate, too optimistic, for example. There are other ways in which a lack of skepticism is apparent. Has the auditor sought sufficient evidence for what the client says? For example, a summary by the client of an important matter is not a substitute for the auditors examining the underlying evidence. And if an auditing standard requires a certain presumption, for example, of a significant risk of fraud in the case of revenue recognition, does the auditor too easily find reasons for overriding the presumption? Firms often suggest that the auditor has been skeptical, but that this is not something that can be explicitly documented. There may be some truth in that, but it ought to come through in what has been recorded and how, in the evidence that has been sought, and in what is reported to the Audit Committee or Board of Directors.
The proper application of professional skepticism is clearly on the radar screen of the Professional Oversight Board and other members of IFIA, the International Forum of Independent Audit Regulators. The ICW agrees that the application of professional skepticism is fundamental to auditing, and we want to do whatever we can to help firms meet increasingly demanding professional requirements in this area. The challenges auditors face are compounded by the difficult economic environment and the complex financial reporting regime in which they operate. The ongoing financial crisis is increasing the risk of misstatements, particularly those arising from fraud. The increasing emphasis on fair values and other estimates, where there may be no definite right answer, also increases the risks auditors face. Professional skepticism is a cornerstone of good auditing. Effective audits should enhance confidence in the financial reporting process. For this process to work, stakeholders need to be satisfied that auditors are applying appropriate professional skepticism. As auditors, we should stand back and look at the overall picture. Does the reporting reflect the substance of what has happened? Does it make sense? Is the evidence too thin? Are we focusing on the things that are there but missing the things that are not there but should be? Are there limitations on the scope of our procedures? Are management's assumptions and forecasts appropriate? Are the assumptions still appropriate given the changing economy? What evidence is there besides what management provided to us? Is the evidence contradictory? Do we really understand enough about potentially complex group structures or potentially sensitive related party relationships and transactions? Do we need more time to complete our audit? Is the reporting biased? Being sceptical is a key element of every ISO audit. Scepticism is central to what an audit is all about. Rather than approaching audit work in an unthinking, box-ticking way, the auditor should always be challenging the information he or she is given and the evidence he or she obtains. We need to step back, look at the wider context and ask, does that make sense? Because of this, scepticism is more a behavioural issue for the entire audit team than an issue that can be addressed solely through specific requirements and standards. In fact, this is one of the reasons why auditing is an exciting career. It requires the application of critical thinking in real-life situations, and this critical thinking shouldn't just happen behind a computer screen in the audit room. It includes walking the floors, communicating effectively with the client's staff, and challenging what's being told if it doesn't quite make sense. Because scepticism is an attitude of mind, it is a difficult thing to measure. It can sometimes seem a difficult thing to document, unlike some of the specific processes or actions that are required by ISOs. However, when there is a significant matter, the act of developing a document which sets out the evidence obtained independently of management, the counter evidence and the rationale can help identify things that don't make sense, areas that require more work, and when to say no. So rather than simply reminding staff to comply with the relevant standards, firms need to look at a much bigger picture and at people issues in particular when they address the topic with the audit staff. And the level of work carried out by auditors needs to be appropriate to the risks they identify. We're not saying that firms should be doing more than is set out in the clarified ISOs, but they should be bringing the ISOs to life by ensuring that all audit behaviours and actions flow from and are informed by a sceptical mindset. ICW and other similar professional bodies play a key part in helping auditors develop the necessary sceptical mindset. As far as ICW is concerned, the ACA's practical training and initial professional development requirements help develop students who act with professional scepticism as a matter of course when carrying out their audit work. Scepticism, together with related issues of ethics and professional judgment, are key components of the ACA. For example, 3 of the skills assessed in the case studies are displaying an inquiring and questioning mind, identifying faults or gaps in arguments, and applying a sceptical and critical approach. For those who have already qualified, the Continuing Professional Development CPD requirements should help develop their scepticism. As scepticism is really a behavioural issue, auditors should be encouraged to find practical ways to develop sceptical behaviours. Firms can help their staff through including appropriate mentoring arrangements in their quality control policies and procedures. This should help to embed a culture of scepticism within audit teams. The recently revised ICW Audit and Assurance Faculty publication, Quality Control in the Audit Environment, now available in an international edition, reminds firms that they need to have policies and procedures to demonstrate that audit staff and partners will develop a mindset of professional scepticism. A key thing is that firms need to have an ongoing commitment to modify both behaviour and internal culture. The Audit and Assurance faculty is planning to issue further related practical guidance on quality control in the near future. This guidance will take into account findings from audit inspections.
Audit firms and auditors are responsible for conducting their audits with professional skepticism in accordance with the relevant standards and selecting audit teams with the appropriate experience and skills. This usually involves a whole range of activities, including proactive leadership from the top, the development of policies and procedures in line with the requirements of the clarified license to be skeptical, and human resources policies and procedures that emphasise the importance of the personality traits that are required in order to have a skeptical mind. This involves many processes in our firms, including recruitment, appraisal, mentoring, and training and development. The sort of personality traits that can benefit a skeptical attitude of mind include determination, intellectual curiosity, clear-headedness, and the ability to see the big picture and to make connections between seemingly unconnected pieces of information. A key element of a skeptical attitude of mind is the ability instinct to challenge where appropriate. Firms may try to target their recruitment efforts to attract individuals with the ability to challenge, which typically will require intellectual curiosity, a certain amount of self-confidence, and good communication skills. But the instinct, which will tell those individuals when it is appropriate to challenge, needs to be honed through training, both theoretical, providing them with the technical knowledge that might help them recognise inconsistencies or risks, and practical on-the-job training. The role of mentoring is very important in helping junior members of audit teams hone their instincts to challenge. These individuals also need to feel that they are working in an environment where it is encouraged for them to ask questions, consult with more senior team members, and where there will be no penalty for asking advice. This will enable them to maintain the confidence that it is necessary to develop a skeptical attitude of mind. One area that should be prioritised is personal skills training that is tailored to develop the abilities of the individual auditor to obtain the necessary mindset. An example of this would be interviewing skills training, where an individual can gain skills on how to formulate probing questions and to identify situations where perhaps they are not being told the full story. These are key skills that all auditors need to have. Firms' audit methodologies should also encourage a skeptical and thoughtful approach to the audit that will allow flexibility to deal with the specific circumstances. This is not straightforward, and firms need to give considerable attention to the programs they already have and improve them as necessary. In addition to the AIU, the ICAW's Quality Assurance Department, or QAD, tells us that where there is a shortfall in performance in this area, it is often in the audit file documentation. Often in these cases, it becomes apparent to the QAD reviewer that judgments have been made demonstrating appropriate skepticism, perhaps arising from long conversations with clients, but there is little documentation of this. It is relatively simple to write brief notes immediately after a conversation has taken place, including details of who was present, what was said, and if challenges were made, what these were and how they were expressed. It is sometimes tempting to note down the resolution of a matter without including any mention of the time spent discussing the issue before the resolution was finally achieved. If a file is going to give a fair representation of the skepticism that was applied in arriving at the conclusions that were reached, this sort of background information is as vital to include as the final resolution of contentious, or even not so contentious, issues. An important part of professional skepticism is challenging management assumptions. As auditors, we are often provided with, for example, an impairment calculation that we challenge as a discount rate looks out of line. The client changes this to a more reasonable assumption, and this is what we audit and document on our audit file. We do not often document that we made the client change their discount rate in the first place. In these cases, a useful file note will explain what issues were discussed, what the client staff said, what evidence was offered, what questions the auditor then asked, how their concerns, if any, were addressed, what further information was provided, how the auditor verified this, and then the final conclusion. Another area in which we need to be sceptical is the consideration of fraud risks. This is a key part of the audit, and this has been highlighted in inspections as a common area of weakness across firms of all sizes. There is often little evidence of thoughtful consideration of fraud at the engagement team meetings. This can be driven by a mindset issue. I know this client inside out, and I know there's not a problem. In many cases, this might actually be a fair judgment, but we always need to be on our guard and assess the risks each year, as there is always a risk of management override. Moving on to going concern. The QAD, like the AIU, emphasises the need to give attention to going concern assumptions. On smaller audits, there will typically be little detailed management information, for example, detailed forecasts, so considerations will need to be more broadly based. In these cases, it is important to document the specific circumstances which relate to the client and the issues they are facing, and the conclusions reached after consideration of all the evidence. Finally, I'd like to stress the importance of good audit planning and making sure that it happens on a timely basis. An effective audit needs to include space for proper consideration and challenge, and this can become tricky to preserve when the auditor is under pressure to make quick decisions. As part of this process, audit team meetings are clearly important. They can also play a helpful role in discussing and identifying the key audit risks. There needs to be a culture within the audit team that supports challenge of the judgments of the more senior members of the team. This might not be easy to achieve. Even if these challenges are encouraged, it still requires more junior members to have the personal skills that give them the confidence to do this. And so it goes back to all the issues we spoke about earlier on the personal qualities that auditors, that is senior and junior auditors, need to have.